With every great player in the NFL, you can usually think of a season where they were at their peak and just truly dominant as compared to everybody else. Some result in record-breaking seasons and others are just considered great. Due to the game evolving and my knowledge only going back so far, we're going to stick from a time period from 2000 to 2020. If you disagree with any of my picks, then let me know in the comments and who you would have picked instead. With that said, here are the most dominant seasons of the past 20 years by each position in the NFL. We'll start with the most important position on the field being the quarterback position. There have been many great seasons from quarterbacks the past couple decades, but for me, it's Peyton Manning in the 2013 season for the Broncos. Just a few seasons prior, Manning sat out an entire season due to neck surgery, then was released by the Colts. There were still some questions whether he could play at an elite level once again, and he definitely answered them. Manning put up a record 55 passing touchdowns that season and only 10 interceptions. He also threw for a total of 5,477 yards that season, which was also an NFL record. Other impressive stats were his 13-3 quarterback record, 8.3 yards per attempt, a 68.3 completion percentage, and averaged 342 yards per game. That season truly defined the saying video game numbers. Unfortunately, Peyton's MVP year ended with a 35-point embarrassing loss in the Super Bowl to the Seahawks. I guess defense really does win championships. Next, we have the running back position. There were a few names and seasons that came to mind when thinking of the running back position. There's Chris Johnson's 2,000-plus yard season for the Titans in 2009, or LaDainian Tomlinson's record-breaking 28 rushing touchdowns in the 2006 season. However, I went with Adrian Peterson in 2012. The thing that was most impressive about this was that Peterson tore his ACL and MCL less than 10 months prior. For normal people, it takes about a year or so to return to full form after a major injury, but Adrian Peterson is no normal human. He played all 16 games in 2012, putting up 2,097 rushing yards, just falling 8 yards short of Eric Dickerson's record back in 1984, and backpacked his offense into the playoffs. He also added 13 total touchdowns, 131 rushing yards per game, and 6 yards per attempt. He'd go on to win MVP, Comeback Player of the Year, and Offensive Player of the Year that season. Next, it's on to fullback. It's hard to find the fullback that was quote-unquote dominant of the past 20 years, but Tony Richardson of the Chiefs is a winner for me. In 2000, Richardson rushed for 697 yards on 147 carries, adding 48 receptions for 468 yards as well. He averaged 4.7 yards per carry and added a total of 6 touchdowns that season. This isn't anywhere close to Adrian Peterson's 2012 season, but for a position that isn't heavily relied on to handle many carries or even targets in today's NFL, it's tough to find great numbers anyway. Next, it's on to wide receiver. When the word dominant comes to mind, you think of Calvin Johnson at the wide receiver position. In 2012, Johnson broke the NFL record for most receiving yards in a season, which still stands to this day. Johnson had 1,964 receiving yards on a whopping 204 targets that season. He added 122 total receptions and averaged a ridiculous 122.8 receiving yards per game. The most shocking thing about this season is that he only managed 5 touchdowns on 204 targets, but at the end of the day, it's still the most dominant receiving season of the past 20 years in my mind. Next, we have the tight end position. There were many honorable mentions here, but I had to go with Rob Gronkowski in 2011. Gronk was only 22 years old at the time, but still put up 1,327 yards on 90 receptions and 18 total touchdowns. He'd go on to have a Hall of Fame-like career to this point, but injuries have slowed him down at certain points as well. However, back in 2011, it was hard to find players that were that big and that agile at the same time. He was truly a special player. Next, it's on to offensive line, kinda. I like to give some love to the offensive line, but it's hard to base anything just off an opinion when there's no meaningful stats to go off of, so I think this is the one position group that we'll have to just throw out the window here. Next, it's on to defensive ends. So as a Giants fan, I gotta give this one to Michael Strahan's 2001 season. Strahan broke the single-season sack record with 22.5 sacks, as well as leading the league in forced fumbles and tackles for loss. He went on to win a much-deserved Defensive Player of the Year award as well. The Hall of Fame defensive end had many great seasons, but 2001 was his best of all. Now, you could argue that J.J. Watt in 2012 was better because he did have 39 tackles for loss as compared to Strahan's 24 in 2001. I'll let the comments sort that one out though. Next, it's on to defensive tackle. This one happened pretty recently. It was Aaron Donald during the 2018 season. Primarily as an interior defensive lineman, Donald totaled 20.5 sacks with 4 forced fumbles, 25 tackles for a loss, and 59 combined tackles. He'd win Defensive Player of the Year honors that season and the next one as well, and he's still just 29 years old, so there's a good chance we could see more greatness from Aaron Donald. Next, we have the outside linebacker position. Depending on the scheme, some players play 3-4 outside linebackers, so I didn't want to include them with defensive ends. I'm going to go with DeMarcus Ware in the 2008 season, and although he had a good amount of sacks out of a 3-point stance, he was still considered an outside linebacker. Ware had 20 sacks, 84 combined tackles, 27 tackles for loss, 6 forced fumbles, and 30 quarterback hits. Ware is sure to end up in the Hall of Fame and had many great seasons as well after this. My honorable mention for outside linebacker would be Von Miller in 2012, who had 18.5 sacks, 6 forced fumbles, and 28 tackles for loss. Once again, I'll let the comments judge that one. Next, it's on to inside linebackers, so I was really torn on this one in between 3 options. There was Brian Urlacher in 2002, Ray Lewis in 2001, and Patrick Willis in 2007. I personally went with Patrick Willis, but I believe all 3 are great options. In 2007, at his age 22 season, Willis led the NFL with 174 combined tackles and 136 solo tackles. He also added 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 5 passes defended. Unfortunately, Willis's career was cut short due to injury, and although he didn't have the longevity of an Urlacher or Lewis, I'll give him the nod for his 2007 season. Next, it's on to cornerback, and cornerback is a tricky one because it's not all about stats. The greatest corners in the league don't see enough targets to make a difference, but when you watch them play, they clearly do. For me, it's Darrelle Revis in the 2009 season. It was his 3rd season in the NFL, and the name Revis Island really came into fruition during that season. Revis earned a ridiculous 97.6 PFF grade in 2009, which is still the highest cornerback grade recorded in the PFF era. He defended a league-leading 31 passes with 6 interceptions and shut down every receiver he faced that season. Here are Revis' statistics during 2009 when playing in man coverage. Against Andre Johnson, he allowed 4 receptions for 35 yards. Against Randy Moss in their first matchup, 4 receptions for 24 yards and an interception. Against Marquise Colston, 2 receptions, 33 yards. Against Ted Ginn, 2 catches, 57 yards, and of course a touchdown. Against Terrell Owens and the Buffalo Bills, 3 catches, 13 yards. Against Lewis Murphy and the Raiders, 4 catches, 58 yards, and an interception. Devon Best, 4 catches, 18 yards. Mike Sims-Walker, 3 catches, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Randy Moss, once again, 5 catches, 34 yards, and a touchdown. Against Steve Smith, 1 reception, 5 yards, and 2 interceptions. Terrell Owens, once again, 3 catches, 31 yards, and an interception. Antonio Bryant of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 2 receptions, 22 yards, and an interception. Roddy White of the Falcons, 2 receptions, 16 yards. Reggie Wayne, who was removed during the 3rd quarter, 3 catches for 33 yards. And against Chad Ochocinco, he had nothing against him. For the next few years, based off his reputation, quarterbacks avoided throwing to Revis' side of the field and was one of the most dominant corners of the past 20 years in my mind. Next, it's on to safety, and for safety, I'm going to give 2 answers because usually there's 2 safety positions and guys alternate and take snaps at both positions anyway. My first pick is Ed Reed during the 2004 season. Reed led the NFL with 9 interceptions, including a pick 6 that went for 106 yards. He also added 17 passes defended, 3 forced fumbles, 6 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and 78 combined tackles. Reed has had plenty of great seasons during his 13-year Hall of Fame career, but 2004 was the best one that stood out to me. For my next pick, I went with Rodney Harrison during the 2000 season for the Chargers. Harrison had 6 interceptions with 6 sacks, 127 combined tackles, 17 passes defended, and 10 tackles for a loss. Harrison, like Ed Reed, is another Hall of Famer with many great seasons under his belt, but 2000 was his best. Now on to kickers and punters. So kickers and punters, they deserve some love as well, so I'll put them on here. For kicker, my pick was the automatic Justin Tucker in the 2016 season. Tucker led the league in field goals made with 38 and was 38 for 39 on the season, which is 97.4%. Tucker was an incredible 10 for 10 on 50-plus yard field goal attempts and was 14 for 14 on field goals between 40 and 49 yards. His lone miss was between a 30 and 39 at New England in Week 14, but aside from that, it was a perfect season for Tucker. For punters, I'm going to go with Shane Lechler in the 2009 season for the Raiders. Lechler led the league in total yards on punts and average yards per punt that season. He averaged over 51 yards per punt, which still ranks second of all time for a single season, and had a long of 70 yards on a single punt that year. That will do it for this list of the most dominant seasons for each position of the past 20 years. Let me know in the comments who you think I left out, or who do you think was the most dominant player overall of the past 2 decades. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.